Lonely rancher buys a wife, but her one condition changes his entire life, forever Wild West tales. From sunrise to sunset, he worked on his ranch, tending to cattle, repairing fences, and walking the endless stretches of dry, dusty fields that made up his property. His hands were rough, calloused from years of labor, and his face was weathered, marked by the scorching sun and biting wind that came with life in the Wild West. While he had built a comfortable life for himself with his wealth from cattle, there was an emptiness he could not fill. The ranch, though large and prosperous, echoed with loneliness. The only sounds were the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional cry of a hawk, and the creaking of the old wooden barn in the wind. Jacob had always been a solitary man. As a young boy, he had grown up on a small farm with his parents and siblings, learning early the value of hard work. His father, a stern man, had instilled in him the belief that a man's worth was measured by what he could provide. Jacob had taken that lesson seriously, dedicating himself to the ranch and refusing to let distractions, including love, slow him down. Yet, despite all his success, a part of him felt incomplete. Nights were the hardest. He would sit on the porch after a long day, watching the stars twinkle in the wide-open sky, and feel a heaviness in his chest. He had no wife to share a warm meal with, no laughter echoing in the house, no hand to hold when the cold winter winds swept across the plains. Town life offered little relief. The nearby settlement was small, a cluster of wooden buildings with dirt streets that turned to mud after rain. The townsfolk knew Jacob as a wealthy, reliable rancher, but few knew the man behind the hard exterior. Conversations with neighbors were polite but brief. People often spoke to him out of necessity rather than friendship. While he sometimes attended town gatherings or the occasional Sunday service at the small church, he always returned home with the same heavy feeling. He admired the families he saw, husbands and wives working side by side, children running through yards, but he also felt the sting of his own isolation. One afternoon, as Jacob rode into town to sell a few cattle, he overheard a conversation that would change the course of his life. At the general store, a group of men were discussing the arrival of women from the East who were seeking new lives in the West. Some were young, some older, but all were looking for opportunity and a fresh start. The women were willing to marry men they had never met, provided they were treated with respect and had a chance to build a life together. At first, Jacob scoffed at the idea. The thought of buying a wife seemed strange, almost unthinkable to him. But as he rode home that evening, the idea stayed with him. Could this be the answer to the emptiness he had carried for so long? That night Jacob sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting shadows across the walls of his modest home. He thought of all the years he had spent alone, the endless work on the ranch, and the dreams he had set aside. Could he really find companionship this way? He had always imagined meeting someone naturally, through friendship or chance, but life had never offered him that path. He realized that he could continue living in solitude, as he had for decades, or he could take a chance on something unconventional. The idea of a fresh start with someone who wanted a new life as much as he did began to fill him with a strange mix of hope and fear. The following weeks were a whirlwind of letters and introductions. Jacob corresponded with several women, reading their words carefully. Some letters were cautious, filled with polite words and careful introductions. Others were bold, speaking openly of dreams and desires, of wanting freedom and opportunity in the West. One letter, in particular, caught his attention. It was from Clara Thompson, a young woman from the East with bright eyes and a sharp mind. She wrote not only of her desire for adventure, but also of her wish to be respected and treated as an equal partner. Her words resonated with Jacob. For the first time in years, he felt a spark of excitement, imagining what life could be like with someone who shared his dreams, but also challenged him to be better. Arrangements were made for Jacob and Clara to meet. The anticipation was both thrilling and terrifying. He rode into town with a mixture of curiosity and anxiety, wondering what kind of woman she would be, whether they would get along, and whether this leap of faith could truly change his life. The townsfolk watched with interest, some whispering, some openly curious, but Jacob barely noticed. His mind was occupied with thoughts of the woman he had yet to meet, the possibility of ending his long years of solitude. When Clara arrived, Jacob was struck by her presence. She was confident yet approachable, strong yet gentle. She had the air of someone who had faced challenges and emerged determined to shape her own life. Their first conversation was careful but honest. Jacob spoke of his ranch, his life, and the responsibilities he carried. Clara shared her dreams, her desire to live freely while contributing to a partnership based on mutual respect. She made her condition clear. She would marry Jacob only if he agreed to treat her as an equal, valuing her opinions and trusting her judgment in matters big and small. It was a bold request, one that challenged everything Jacob thought he knew about relationships, yet he found himself drawn to her honesty and strength. Jacob knew that accepting her condition would require a change in himself. He had always been independent, sometimes stubborn, used to making decisions without consulting anyone. Yet he also recognized that his years of loneliness had taught him the value of companionship more than he realized. He had spent so long managing the ranch, controlling every detail, that he had forgotten the simple joys of sharing life with someone else. Clara's condition was not a limitation. It was an opportunity to grow, to open his heart, and to build something lasting. With a steady voice and a nod, he agreed. They would marry and he would honor her wishes. As the sun set behind the distant hills that evening, Jacob felt a shift within himself. For the first time in decades, he felt anticipation not for work or wealth, but for life itself. The vast, lonely ranch that had once seemed like a prison now held the promise of companionship, of laughter, and of shared dreams. He knew challenges lay ahead, the hardships of the land, the uncertainties of marriage. But for the first time, Jacob felt ready to face them not alone, but with someone by his side. That night, as he lay beneath the wide, starlit sky, he allowed himself to imagine a future filled with partnership, respect, and perhaps even love. The lonely rancher's life, so long defined by solitude, was on the brink of a remarkable transformation. When Jacob first saw Clara Thompson waiting at the edge of the small town, he felt a strange mix of curiosity and nervousness. She stood straight and confident, her eyes scanning the dusty street with quiet determination. Clara had traveled far from the east, leaving behind familiar streets, family, and friends, to begin a new life in the untamed West. She carried only a few belongings, but her spirit seemed larger than any suitcase could hold. Jacob, who was used to solitude and silence, found himself both anxious and excited about the life that might begin with this woman. Their first meeting was polite but cautious. Jacob extended his hand, and Clara shook it firmly, a signal of her strength and independence. They walked together through the town, speaking of the journey that had brought Clara westward and the life Jacob had built on his ranch. Clara listened carefully as Jacob spoke of the ranch, of the long hours spent with cattle, of the responsibility of maintaining a vast property with little help. She did not flinch at the challenges he described. Instead, she asked thoughtful questions, showing genuine interest. Jacob, who had rarely spoken to someone who truly understood the land, felt a sense of relief. After a long walk, they sat outside a small cafe, the sun casting long shadows across the wooden tables. Clara leaned forward slightly and spoke with honesty. She explained that she did not wish to be just a housewife, confined to the kitchen and the home. She wanted a partnership, a marriage where both voices were heard, where decisions were shared, and where she could contribute to the ranch in meaningful ways. She outlined her condition clearly. She would marry Jacob only if he respected her independence and trusted her judgment. It was a simple request, but one that carried weight. Jacob, who had spent decades running his ranch alone, understood that this was no ordinary arrangement. At first, Jacob struggled to reconcile her condition with his own expectations. He had always been the master of his land, making decisions quickly and often without consulting anyone. The idea of sharing control, of listening to someone else's advice, felt foreign and uncomfortable. Yet, as he looked into Clara's eyes, he realized that her condition was not a demand meant to challenge him unnecessarily. It was a request for respect and partnership, something that Jacob had longed for without fully realizing it. After a pause, he nodded slowly and agreed. He would honor her condition, and in doing so, he felt a small but significant shift within himself. Their engagement was unusual, even for the Wild West. Word spread quickly through the town about Jacob's plan to buy a wife, but Clara's condition was also known. Some townsfolk whispered skeptically, unsure if such an arrangement could work. Others watched with curiosity, wondering how a man so used to solitude would adjust to the presence of a strong, independent woman. Jacob paid little attention to the gossip. He was focused on the future, imagining a life where he was no longer alone, where he could share his work, his joys, and even his struggles with someone who genuinely cared. As the days passed, Clara began to adjust to life near the ranch, staying first in the small town until arrangements were made for her move. She and Jacob spent long afternoons walking the dusty paths, discussing the practicalities of ranch life. Jacob explained the routines, the feeding schedules for the cattle, the maintenance of fences, and the seasonal challenges of weather and livestock. Clara listened intently, asking questions and offering her own ideas. She suggested small improvements to the routines, from organizing the barn more efficiently to keeping better records of cattle movements. Jacob, though hesitant at first, found that her suggestions often made sense. Slowly, he began to see her not as a newcomer to the West, but as a capable partner who could help him manage the vast responsibilities of the ranch. The journey to the ranch itself was long and difficult. Clara rode with Jacob in a small wagon, bouncing along dirt roads that twisted through hills and valleys. Dust covered their clothes, and the sun beat down relentlessly, but Clara did not complain. She marveled at the wide-open spaces, the rolling hills, and the endless sky above. Jacob watched her quietly, noticing the way her eyes lit up with wonder and curiosity. For the first time, he felt that his world, once so familiar and unchanging, might become a place of new experiences and shared adventures. The ride was tiring, but it allowed them to talk at length, sharing stories of their pasts and their hopes for the future. When they finally arrived at the ranch, Clara was both impressed and overwhelmed. The property was vast, with endless fields stretching toward the horizon. The barn was large but worn, the fences sturdy but needing repair, and the cattle scattered across the land. Jacob gave her a tour, explaining the daily tasks and the work that would need attention. Clara took it all in, her mind already formulating ideas for improvement and organization. Jacob noticed her energy and determination, realizing that this partnership might be more valuable than he had imagined. Her condition, which had seemed unusual at first, was becoming a foundation for something stronger than he had ever experienced alone. Living together in the early days was not without challenges. Clara's desire to help with the ranch sometimes clashed with Jacob's habits. He had long-standing routines, and he found it difficult to accept changes suggested by someone else, even someone he cared about. There were moments of tension, brief arguments over chores or the management of the cattle. Yet, each time, Clara approached the situation with patience and reason, never undermining him but explaining her perspective clearly. Jacob, slowly and sometimes reluctantly, began to see that her ideas often improved efficiency and made life easier for both of them. He realized that respecting her independence did not diminish his role, it strengthened their partnership. As days turned into weeks, they began to develop a rhythm. Mornings were spent tending to the cattle, repairing fences, and preparing the land for seasonal changes. Afternoons were quieter, with Clara helping in the house, keeping records and making plans for improvements. Evenings brought moments of shared relaxation, sitting on the porch and watching the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. Jacob began to appreciate the sound of another voice in the house, the laughter that echoed through the rooms, and the comfort of knowing someone cared about the life they were building together. Clara's presence brought warmth to the ranch, a reminder that life could be richer when shared. Over time, Jacob noticed changes in himself. He became more patient, more willing to listen, and more open to new ideas. Clara's influence was subtle but powerful. She encouraged him to see the ranch not just as property, but as a home, a place where care and thoughtfulness mattered as much as hard work. He began to take pride not only in the cattle and the fences, but in the small details Clara pointed out, cleaning the barn more thoroughly, organizing supplies, and even planting a small garden near the house. These changes, though minor, made life more enjoyable and brought a sense of accomplishment beyond the demands of labor. Their bond deepened as they faced small challenges together. A sudden rainstorm threatened to flood parts of the property, forcing them to work side by side to protect the livestock. A lost calf required hours of searching and care, testing their patience and determination. Each challenge reinforced their partnership and built trust. Jacob began to realize that Clara's condition, her request for respect and equality, was not just a rule to follow but a key to a happier, more fulfilling life. It required him to see the world through her eyes, to value her judgment, and to embrace the idea that life was better when shared. By the end of the first season together, Jacob and Clara had settled into a life that was both challenging and rewarding. The ranch was no longer just a place of labor and solitude. It had become a home filled with laughter, conversation, and mutual respect. Jacob felt a sense of fulfillment he had never known, understanding that the condition Clara had set was not a limitation but a blessing. It had changed the way he approached work, life, and relationships. What had started as an unusual arrangement, a man buying a wife, was transforming into a true partnership, one built on understanding, trust, and shared dreams. Jacob often reflected on the day he first met Clara. He realized that the emptiness he had felt for so many years was not simply loneliness. It was the absence of connection, the lack of someone to share both burdens and joys. Clara's condition, which had seemed bold and unconventional at first, had opened the door to a life richer than he had imagined. He no longer feared change or the unknown. Instead, he welcomed the adventure of building a future with someone who challenged him, supported him, and loved him in ways he had never experienced. As the sun set on the ranch, painting the sky in brilliant colors, Jacob and Clara sat together on the porch, sharing a quiet moment. The wind rustled through the tall grasses, carrying the scent of earth and cattle. In that peaceful evening, Jacob felt a deep sense of gratitude. The lonely rancher who had once believed he would live out his days in isolation had found not only a wife but a partner, a companion, and a friend. The journey ahead would not always be easy, but for the first time, Jacob felt ready to face life's challenges with someone by his side. The future, once uncertain and lonely, now held the promise of shared adventures, love, and a life transformed by mutual respect and understanding. Life on the ranch settled into a rhythm, but it was far from easy. Jacob McAllister had always been a man of routine, accustomed to making decisions alone and managing his land with strict control. Clara, on the other hand, was a woman of ideas and independence, someone who questioned traditions when she saw better ways of doing things. At first, the differences in their approach created tension. Jacob, used to authority and long-standing habits, sometimes bristled at Clara's suggestions. Clara, accustomed to being heard and respected, found it frustrating when Jacob resisted change. Yet beneath the disagreements, a mutual respect began to grow. Each understood that the other had strengths that could improve life on the ranch. The mornings were the busiest part of the day. They rose before dawn, the air crisp and filled with the scent of earth and livestock. Jacob would lead the work, giving instructions to Clara and the ranch hands, but he quickly realized that Clara's ideas often made their labor more efficient. She suggested rearranging the feeding schedule so that the cattle were tended in smaller groups, reducing stress on the animals and saving hours of work. Jacob, initially hesitant, followed her advice and was surprised at the results. Slowly, he began to trust her judgment, understanding that her independence was not a challenge to his authority, but a resource that could make their work easier and their lives richer. Afternoons were often quieter, but no less demanding. Clara took on responsibilities that went beyond household chores. She began keeping detailed records of the cattle, tracking births, sales, and losses. She also mapped out the fields, noting which areas needed repair or improvement, and suggested planting new crops to supplement their livestock. Jacob watched as she moved with purpose, organizing the ranch with a sharp eye and careful planning. Her presence brought a sense of order to the sprawling property, something Jacob had never fully realized he needed. Slowly, he began to see the value of collaboration and the difference it made when two minds worked together. Despite their progress, challenges were inevitable. One morning, Jacob discovered that a section of the fence along the northern pasture had been damaged during the night, likely by a small herd of wandering cattle. Panic set in as he feared the animals would escape or be lost to predators. Clara, seeing his worry, calmly suggested dividing their workers to quickly repair the fence while leading the cattle back to safety. Together, they coordinated the effort, working tirelessly under the hot sun. By late afternoon, the fence was repaired, and all the cattle were accounted for. Jacob realized that Clara's ability to stay calm under pressure and her practical solutions had saved both time and resources. He began to appreciate her not just as a companion but as a vital partner in running the ranch. Their evenings brought moments of quiet reflection. After a long day of work, they would sit on the porch, sharing stories and dreams. Clara spoke of her childhood in the East, of the bustling streets she had left behind, and the hopes that had driven her to seek a new life in the West. Jacob shared tales of his youth, the lessons learned on the family farm, and the long years of solitude he had endured. These conversations brought them closer, helping them understand each other's pasts and the experiences that shaped their character. Jacob began to realize that marriage was not just about living together, but about building a bond that could endure hardship and joy alike. Yet not every day was smooth. One afternoon, Clara decided to try her hand at rounding up some of the younger cattle, despite her inexperience with horseback work. Jacob watched nervously, ready to intervene if things went wrong. Clara, however, proved surprisingly skilled, handling the animals with a combination of courage and patience that impressed even Jacob. Though he was initially hesitant to let her take such risks, he found himself admiring her determination and bravery. Her actions reminded him that strength came in many forms, and that independence was not a threat, but a complement to his own abilities. The first season together also brought unexpected lessons in teamwork. A drought struck the region, threatening water supplies for both the cattle and their crops. Jacob and Clara had to devise new strategies to conserve resources. Clara suggested digging additional wells and creating small reservoirs to store water during scarce periods. Jacob coordinated the work crews and oversaw the technical aspects of the project. By working together, they managed not only to save the ranch, but also to improve its infrastructure for future seasons. Jacob began to see how Clara's fresh perspective and willingness to innovate could transform the ranch from a simple property into a thriving, sustainable operation. Through all these experiences, Jacob found his heart and mind opening in ways he never expected. He began to anticipate Clara's ideas, consulting her before making major decisions. He listened more carefully, valuing her opinions and learning to compromise when necessary. Clara, in turn, learned the rhythm of the land, understanding the physical demands of ranch work and the wisdom behind some of Jacob's older methods. They became a team, each complementing the other's strengths and covering weaknesses. Their early disagreements faded into mutual understanding, replaced by respect, admiration, and the beginnings of deep affection. The transformation was not only practical but emotional. Jacob noticed himself smiling more, feeling lighter even after long days of labor. He enjoyed sharing meals with Clara, talking about their plans for the ranch, and listening to her thoughts on life. The once lonely ranch house now echoed with conversation and laughter. Clara, who had once worried about fitting into a life so different from the East, found joy in contributing meaningfully, shaping both the ranch and Jacob's life in profound ways. Together, they began to envision a future not limited by solitude or old habits, but full of opportunity and shared success. Challenges continued to test their partnership, but each difficulty strengthened their bond. One day, a neighboring rancher accused Jacob of encroaching on his land. Tensions rose, and a confrontation seemed inevitable. Clara suggested they approach the situation calmly, gather evidence, and negotiate rather than fight. Jacob, trusting her judgment, followed her advice. Their peaceful resolution not only avoided conflict, but also earned the respect of their neighbors. Jacob realized that Clara's wisdom and strategic thinking were invaluable, teaching him that strength was not always measured by physical force but by patience, intelligence, and foresight. As months passed, Jacob and Clara's partnership deepened. They began planning long-term improvements to the ranch, constructing sturdier barns, expanding the grazing areas, and even planting orchards to provide additional food and income. Clara's presence inspired innovation, while Jacob's experience ensured that their plans were practical and sustainable. They worked side by side, sometimes in silence, sometimes in conversation, always supporting each other. Their relationship was no longer simply a marriage arranged out of necessity. It had become a genuine partnership, built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. The emotional growth was as important as the practical. Jacob began to feel a warmth he had never known in his years of solitude. He felt seen and appreciated, not just for his wealth or hard work, but for who he was as a person. Clara's respect for his abilities and her gentle challenges to his habits made him feel alive in a way he had long forgotten. Clara, too, found comfort in Jacob's steady presence, his willingness to learn and adapt, and his growing admiration for her independence and strength. Together, they created a life richer than either could have imagined alone. By the end of the first year living together, Jacob realized that Clara's condition, her request for respect and equality, had changed his life more than he could have imagined. She had not only helped him run the ranch more efficiently, but had also reshaped his perspective on relationships, work, and companionship. He no longer saw marriage as a formality or a contract. He saw it as a partnership, one that required patience, understanding, and mutual respect. Clara had brought new life to the ranch, and in doing so, she had breathed new life into Jacob's heart as well. Evenings on the porch became moments of reflection and quiet happiness. Jacob and Clara would sit together, watching the sun sink behind the hills, the sky painted with shades of orange, pink, and purple. the sound of cattle in the distance, and the gentle rustling of the wind through the grass created a peaceful rhythm that neither had experienced alone. Jacob often thought about the day he agreed to Clara's condition, realizing that what had seemed like a small request had become the key to a transformed life. The lonely rancher, once rigid and isolated, had found a companion who challenged him, supported him, and made every day more meaningful. Through the trials and triumphs of ranch life, Jacob and Clara learned that true partnership was not about controlling each other, but about growing together. Their bond had been tested by labor, weather, and challenges both practical and emotional, and each test had strengthened their connection. Jacob had learned the value of listening, of compromise, and of shared vision. Clara had learned the rhythms and demands of ranch life, as well as the importance of trust and patience. Together, they were building a life that neither could have achieved alone, a life full of promise, partnership, and the quiet joys of love born from respect. The summer had been unusually hot, and the dry air left the ranch parched. The cattle wandered slowly across the dusty fields, and the grass in the pastures had turned brittle and brown. Jacob McAllister and Clara Thompson had worked tirelessly to maintain the ranch during this challenging season. Even with their combined efforts, the harsh weather tested their patience, strength, and ingenuity. Both knew that the days ahead would demand every ounce of courage and skill they possessed. The ranch, their livelihood, and their future were all on the line. One afternoon, dark clouds gathered on the horizon, and a fierce storm rolled in faster than either of them expected. The wind howled across the fields, bending the tall grasses and rattling the barn doors. Thunder cracked loudly, echoing through the hills, and rain began to pour in heavy sheets. Jacob immediately ran to secure the cattle, fearing that the floodwaters could wash them away or trap them in unsafe areas. Clara, despite being newer to ranch work, jumped into action beside him. She guided the animals toward higher ground, her voice calm but commanding over the roar of the wind. Together, they worked quickly, moving through the storm with determination and care. The storm worsened, bringing not just heavy rain but hail and strong gusts of wind. Trees bent dangerously, and fences began to collapse under the pressure of the weather. Jacob was used to tough conditions, but he had never faced one quite like this. Panic threatened to take hold, but he drew strength from Clara's composure. She remained focused, thinking quickly and offering practical solutions. She suggested reinforcing certain fences with spare timber and using temporary barriers to protect the most vulnerable livestock. Jacob followed her instructions, amazed at how her calm and quick thinking steadied both him and the workers. For hours they battled the storm. Their clothes were soaked, their boots caked with mud, and their hands blistered from constant labor, but neither complained. They moved as a team, anticipating each other's actions without needing to speak. Jacob realized that Clara's condition, the request for mutual respect and partnership, had prepared him for moments like this. Her independence was not just a personality trait, it was a source of strength that complemented his own experience and knowledge. Without her guidance and courage, the damage to the ranch could have been devastating. As night fell, the storm finally began to subside, leaving behind a landscape transformed by wind, rain, and hail. The ranch had suffered losses. Several fences were destroyed, and a few animals were missing or injured. Yet thanks to their teamwork, the majority of the cattle were safe, and the barn had held strong. Jacob and Clara, exhausted but relieved, surveyed the damage together. The sight of the battered fields and broken fences could have been discouraging, but instead, it became a moment of realization. They had faced the storm side by side, and their combined effort had saved the ranch. Jacob understood that Clara's insistence on partnership had not been a challenge to his authority, it had been a lifeline. In the days following the storm, they worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Clara organized the rebuilding process, creating schedules and delegating tasks to ensure that the work was completed efficiently. Jacob handled the heavy labor, repairing fences, moving hay, and tending to injured cattle. The long days tested their endurance, but each obstacle brought them closer together. Jacob began to see Clara not just as his wife, but as a true partner, someone whose intelligence, courage, and determination matched his own. Her presence had transformed the ranch from a solitary enterprise into a thriving, cooperative operation. The storm also revealed vulnerabilities they had not noticed before. Some of the older fences had been poorly maintained, certain areas of pasture drained poorly, and the water supply needed improvement to withstand future dry seasons. Clara suggested long-term solutions, such as digging new trenches to improve drainage and constructing sturdier fences in strategic locations. Jacob listened carefully, recognizing that her insights were crucial for the ranch's future. For the first time, he saw their life together as more than survival. It was about building a legacy, creating a ranch that could thrive for generations. Their teamwork during the storm created a deeper emotional bond as well. Jacob saw Clara's bravery not just in action, but in her willingness to face danger with calm determination. She had risked herself to protect the animals and the land, refusing to let fear dictate her actions. Jacob, who had always considered himself capable of handling any challenge alone, realized that life was not meant to be endured in solitude. True strength came from connection, from trust, and from shared responsibility. Clara's condition, once merely a rule for their marriage, had proven to be a guiding principle for life itself. Evenings after the storm were quiet but full of reflection. Jacob and Clara would sit on the porch, surveying the repairs and discussing future plans. They shared their fears, hopes, and lessons learned from the storm. Jacob admitted that he had underestimated Clara's abilities at first, and Clara confessed that she had sometimes worried about his willingness to listen. Both recognized that their respect and trust for each other had grown exponentially. The storm had been a trial, but it had also revealed the depth of their partnership and the potential of their shared life. In the weeks that followed, the ranch slowly returned to normal. Grass began to grow again in patches, the cattle regained strength, and the fences were rebuilt stronger than before. Jacob and Clara continued to refine their routines, incorporating lessons learned from the storm. They introduced new methods for tracking livestock, planned improvements to the water supply, and created contingency plans for future weather challenges. Each small success reinforced their bond and their belief in the power of collaboration. Jacob began to take pride not only in the physical state of the ranch, but in the emotional and practical partnership that had developed between them. The storm also brought a broader perspective on life for Jacob. He realized that his long years of solitude had limited his understanding of resilience, strength, and love. Clara's insistence on respect and equality had forced him to adapt, to open his mind, and to trust another person completely. Through her guidance and courage, he discovered a form of happiness that he had never known, a happiness that came not from wealth or control, but from shared experiences, mutual support, and the knowledge that he was not alone. Clara had transformed not just the ranch but his heart, showing him that life could be richer and more meaningful when faced together. Their experience during the storm also deepened their emotional connection. Jacob began to appreciate not only Clara's practical skills, but also her empathy, patience, and unwavering optimism. Clara's encouragement helped him see past his own limitations, reminding him that challenges were opportunities for growth rather than burdens to endure alone. Together, they celebrated small victories, such as saving a calf trapped in a flooded area or completing repairs before the next rain. Each triumph, no matter how minor, strengthened their bond and reinforced the lessons learned from the storm. By the end of the summer, Jacob and Clara had emerged stronger, wiser, and more united than ever. The storm, which had initially seemed like a disaster, became a turning point in their lives. It proved that their partnership could withstand adversity, and that their combined skills, determination, and respect for one another could overcome nearly any obstacle. Jacob reflected on the day he agreed to Clara's condition, realizing that her single request had changed his life in profound ways. Her insistence on equality and partnership had not only shaped their marriage, but had also transformed his approach to life itself. Jacob now understood that the true value of their union was not in the convenience of companionship, but in the strength it provided during moments of crisis. Clara's presence had made him a better man, teaching him patience, adaptability, and the importance of listening. She had shown him that courage was not measured solely by physical action, but by the willingness to trust, respect, and support another person. The ranch, once a solitary endeavor, had become a symbol of their shared vision, resilience, and love. As the sun set on another day, casting a warm golden glow across the repaired fields and sturdy fences, Jacob and Clara sat side by side on the porch. They watched the cattle grazing peacefully, the wind rustling through the grass, and the sky slowly darkening into night. Jacob felt a deep sense of gratitude and fulfillment. The lonely rancher he had once been had transformed into a man with purpose, connection, and hope for the future. Clara's single condition, her request for respect and partnership, had not been a limitation but a gift. It had taught him the value of collaboration, the strength found in mutual support, and the joy of shared life. Jacob knew that future storms would come, challenges both small and great, but he felt confident facing them with Clara by his side. The storm had tested them, shaped them, and ultimately bound them together in ways that neither could have anticipated. The ranch had survived, but more importantly, their marriage had survived and grown stronger. Jacob realized that life was no longer about enduring hardship alone. It was about facing the world together, with courage, trust, and love. For the first time, Jacob truly understood the power of partnership. He looked at Clara, who smiled softly, her eyes reflecting both determination and affection, and felt a sense of peace he had never known. The lonely rancher had been transformed into a man with purpose, heart, and hope. The storm, which had seemed like a threat to everything he had built, had become the turning point that reshaped his life forever. Jacob realized that the greatest strength in the Wild West was not wealth, skill, or solitude. It was connection, respect, and the courage to face life together. As the years passed, the McAllister Ranch became more than just a place of work. It became a true home filled with warmth, laughter, and life. Jacob and Clara had faced countless challenges together, from harsh weather to unexpected setbacks, and each trial had strengthened their bond. The ranch, once a lonely and isolated property, now thrived under their joint care. Fields were lush, fences strong, and the cattle healthy and well-managed. Jacob often looked around and marveled at how different life had become since the day he agreed to Clara's condition. Her single request for respect and partnership had transformed not only their marriage, but the entire rhythm of his life. Jacob and Clara had also built a family. Children were born into the ranch, filling the house with laughter and energy that had long been absent. Jacob found joy in guiding them through chores and lessons about ranch life, teaching them skills he had honed over decades. Clara balanced work and family with remarkable grace, showing the children how to approach life with courage, independence, and kindness. Together, Jacob and Clara created a household where respect, cooperation, and love were central. Their children learned from both parents, witnessing firsthand the power of partnership and the value of listening to one another. Life was not without its difficulties, but Jacob and Clara faced every challenge together. Illness, financial uncertainty, and natural obstacles tested their resilience, but they never faced these problems alone. Clara's practical thinking and quick decisions often balanced Jacob's strength and experience. He, in turn, provided steady guidance, teaching patience and the value of careful planning. Their relationship, once built on a condition, had matured into something deeper, a genuine, lasting love rooted in understanding, respect, and shared dreams. Jacob reflected on how far they had come. He remembered the days when he had wandered the ranch alone, the silence pressing on him, the emptiness he could not shake. He recalled the moment he first met Clara, her bold condition for marriage, and the mix of fear and hope he had felt. Now, years later, he realized that her insistence on equality had been the catalyst for everything good in his life. Without her guidance, courage, and ideas, the ranch would not have thrived, and he would not have known the fulfillment that came from shared labor, laughter, and companionship. Clara had not only changed the day-to-day workings of the ranch, but had reshaped Jacob's heart entirely. The ranch became well known in the surrounding region, not just for its size or productivity, but for the harmony in which it was run. Neighbors admired the cooperation and mutual respect between Jacob and Clara. Some even sought their advice on managing land, livestock, and household life together. Jacob, who had once been seen as a solitary and stern rancher, was now respected as a man who could combine strength with wisdom, while Clara's intelligence, courage, and vision earned her admiration from all who knew her. Together, they set an example of what could be accomplished when partnership, respect, and communication guided every decision. Jacob and Clara also became more adventurous over time. They explored new grazing lands, experimented with crops, and implemented methods to improve water supply and soil quality. Each project was approached collaboratively, with both offering ideas and supporting each other's initiatives. The ranch became a place of innovation and careful planning, a reflection of their combined strengths. Jacob no longer felt burdened by the isolation of ranch life. He looked forward to each day, knowing he had a partner who shared the work, celebrated the successes, and stood by him through every challenge. Even simple moments brought joy. Mornings began with the children running across the yard, the smell of fresh bread baking in the kitchen, and the gentle lowing of cattle in the pastures. Evenings were filled with shared meals, storytelling, and laughter. Jacob found that life on the ranch was no longer about survival or labor alone. It was about connection, family, and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Clara's influence had transformed every aspect of the ranch, not through force, but through collaboration, insight, and respect. Their life together had become richer than either could have imagined alone. One day, as Jacob stood on the porch surveying the fields, he thought about the storm that had tested them years before. That moment had been a turning point, teaching him the importance of trust, adaptability, and relying on someone else's strengths. The storm had revealed that he did not have to face life alone, and Clara's calm courage had saved the ranch. Now, looking over the thriving property and the happy family, he understood that their greatest strength lay in partnership. Every fence, every field, every barn was a testament to what they had accomplished together. Clara, too, reflected on her journey. She remembered the nervous excitement she had felt traveling west, the uncertainty of leaving her home, and the bold condition she had set for her marriage. She had feared that Jacob might resist her ideas, or that she would struggle to find her place in the harsh life of the ranch. But the years had proven that her belief in equality and partnership was not only right but necessary. She had not only survived the challenges of the Wild West, but had helped shape a life of purpose, joy, and fulfillment for her family. Her courage and wisdom had changed Jacob, the ranch, and their future forever. Together, Jacob and Clara taught their children the value of respect, hard work, and collaboration. They showed them that challenges were not meant to be faced alone, and that true love was built on trust, communication, and mutual support. Their family grew not only in numbers but in strength, resilience, and unity. The lessons learned from the hardships, the storms, and the long years of ranch life became a foundation for the next generation. The McAllister children grew up understanding the importance of equality, partnership, and the power of working together toward shared goals. Jacob often thought about the lonely days before Clara arrived, the silence that once filled the house, and the sense of emptiness that had weighed heavily on him. He could hardly imagine returning to that life. Clara's condition, which had seemed bold at first, had been the key to everything he had gained: a thriving ranch, a loving family, and a life filled with purpose and happiness. He realized that love was not about control or convenience. It was about respect, support, and shared effort. Clara had taught him that true partnership could transform not only a home but a heart, and he was grateful every day for her wisdom and courage. The ranch continued to prosper, and the McAllisters became respected members of the wider community. Jacob and Clara were known for their fairness, their ability to solve problems, and their willingness to help neighbors in need. Visitors often remarked on the warmth of the household, the harmony between husband and wife, and the thriving life of the ranch. Jacob, who had once believed that wealth and hard work were all that mattered, now understood that the greatest riches lay in relationships, in family, and in the trust and respect shared between partners. As the years turned into decades, Jacob and Clara's story became a legend in the region. People spoke of the lonely rancher who had once lived in solitude, the brave woman who had set one bold condition, and the partnership that had changed everything. But for Jacob and Clara, the most important legacy was not fame or wealth. It was the life they had built together. Every morning, as they worked side by side on the ranch, watched their children grow, and shared quiet evenings on the porch, they felt the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. They had faced challenges, adapted to change, and discovered that the greatest strength in life was not facing the world alone, but sharing it with someone who respected, loved, and believed in you. In the end, the lonely rancher had found more than a wife. He had found a partner, a friend, and a guide who had helped him see life in a new way. Clara had not only improved the ranch but had transformed Jacob's heart and mind. Together, they had created a home, a family, and a legacy built on respect, trust, and love. Jacob knew that life would continue to bring challenges, storms, and unexpected trials, but he felt ready to face them all. With Clara by his side, the future was no longer uncertain or lonely. It was full of promise, happiness, and shared adventure, a life forever changed by one simple condition that had opened the door to everything he had ever wanted. And so, the McAllister Ranch flourished, a testament to partnership, courage, and respect. Jacob and Clara's story was remembered not for the wealth of their land, but for the richness of their hearts. They had taken a chance, faced the unknown, and discovered that true happiness comes from sharing life with someone who stands beside you through every challenge, every triumph, and every quiet moment in between. The lonely rancher was no longer lonely. He had everything he had ever needed, and it had all begun with one condition that changed his life forever.